you so much. That sounds great. Thank you very much, and thank you all for being here. First of all, well, for starting the Friday like this. I'm sure this will be an influential day. If not for your career, you can plan your Friday evening or weekend, I guess, together. But thanks first and foremost for being here, meaning here in the EU institutions, having taken some time of your life to serve the European institutions and to serve the European Union. And now it's time to look at what comes next. I have a written speech, but I'm not going to read a written speech. If that is fine for you, I would rather share a bit of my experience. Things, when you live them, look different than how they are afterwards, how they appear on a CV. When you leave them, they appear much less in order, and then at the end of the day, something makes sense. And I guess this is the old meaning also of you being here, finding the links that make sense in your career path. But also, I would like very much to have some time to exchange afterwards a little bit. Ready to answer questions, not only on my experience, but also on whatever you would like to discuss, foreign policy, defense, whatever you want, or for me, even more interesting, to hear your views on the European institutions, because you spent a few months here working in different institutions, mainly in the Commission, I understand, but also in others. To me, it is extremely valuable to hear from you how you see the work in the institutions. Because my experience has been, in the beginning, in 2014, when I came here, a little bit of a shock that I guess was similar to the shock you had the first days, of a complexity, sometimes a heaviness of procedures and formality. And still I was coming from leading a ministry, in a country that is not always an easy one. And the size was definitely big of the ministry back then. But still, I think that your views, your eyes on the European institutions and the ways in which they function or not function can tell us something about how we can improve our work, how we can change things. The usual thing you hear when you start jobs like this is, no, you cannot do this because it has never been done before. Well, you have the chance of actually telling us, maybe it has not been done before, but it would be great to do it. And that is a new approach that the more time you spend in institutions, the more you lose. So I would be really honored to hear your views also on how your experience has been and how we can improve the way in which we work, if you feel like doing that. That would be a plus for me. Then, how did it all start? I actually started in the 90s, as you said, and it started with, in a moment when Italy became, from a country of origin of migrants, a country of destination. In the early 90s, there were the first shocks in the Italian public opinion because some Africans were coming and picking up tomatoes in the countryside and around Naples and Caserta in the south of Italy. And that provoked reactions in the society that were not necessarily very positive ones. And at the time I was finishing high school, beginning university, I had some time that I was taking out of my studies. That's why it took much longer to graduate, actually, but I never regretted it. It took double the time, actually, to graduate, but what I was doing in parallel to my university studies was actually maybe even more important from time to time than what I was studying in university, I have to admit, even if what I studied at university was also very important, but the two things went together and were complementary. So I took some time and I started to volunteer, yes, first it was real volunteering for opening desks for assistance, legal assistance, or language courses for migrants and things like that. Then anti-racist campaigns that became immediately European level. As I was able to speak English and French, I was asked to represent some Italian NGOs in European networks and campaigns. Starting from the Council of Europe, that was the All Different, All Equal campaign. We were organizing a great thing. There was a train going, well, there were 6 trains starting from different corners of Europe and getting to Strasbourg for a European Youth Week. And we worked for 2 years to organize those trains. The trains were stopping in every city. I was on the team of the Balkan train in the early 90s, so you can imagine how easy the living together was, starting from Cyprus and Turkey to all the former Yugoslavian republics in times that were still conflictual. And then getting to the north of Italy and Strasbourg. And that was, I think, forging my not only European identity a lot, but also, and that was before the Erasmus actually, but also very much gave me the sense that you can have a power you cannot imagine. That doing things together was a way of changing ways of looking at each other, realizing who the other is, what you can do together, working at projects that could change the perception, and through individuals, a power of changing societies. Small things, but also big things. And we were doing stupid things, role plays and things together just to bring people that were not used to be together anymore together. I was also doing a bit of politics already, and many of the people I was doing politics with were looking at this as, you know, the light side of things. Yeah, you play games, it's okay. But then, actually, I have to tell you, that was one experience that was, for me, essential, as all the ones I've done. The second European experience was just around the corner here at the European Youth Forum. That was my impact with the European institutions. I was there dealing with social affairs and employment for not as a staff. I was bureau member, I think, of vice president, something like that. But we were working on campaigns on well, you know that better than I do probably, on social policies and the links between education and jobs. The policies of the EU institutions seen from the Youth Forum perspective. And that was probably the link between the NGO side and the institution side, because indeed the European Youth Forum was already an interlocutor for the institution. So I started to become a bit more institutionalized there probably, but it was still very relative. It was also still a lot of fun. And I think that was good. This mix of doing serious things, spending a lot of time together. By the way, a few friends of that time are working in the European institutions now, and I've crossed them quite often. One is in the Commission, one is in DS. And it's great to see that people are still around in the same paths of life somehow. And to me, these two experiences have been as important as the university, the studies, the Erasmus, and then the first jobs. Actually, I have to tell you, my first 2 jobs had nothing to do with institutions. My first ever job was in a McDonald's, and the second one was in a call center. So I guess I'm fully part of the generation that had to struggle a bit with temporary works. But that was also an experience. I have to tell you, especially in the McDonald's, the experience was a bit tough because it was in London, Oxford Street, and I found out that Italians were the lowest level of the hierarchy at that time. I don't know if that has changed, but it was an important experience as well. Luckily, it lasted only for 4 months, but I survived, and it learned me a lot. Then all the rest is, well, as you said, more or less as you said. But what I would like to say here is this. What you have done in these months here, the contacts you have established, the experience you've made, hopefully positive, but even the negative ones, will stay with you forever, probably, especially the negative ones. And they will come back to your mind including contacts and people you have met in these months for the years to come. Even if you change completely course of career, and I guess if you're here, that is not necessarily your ambition or your desire. This is something that will be influential. I don't know if this particular day or tomorrow, but this month for sure. I see, again, also in people that after these experiences have chosen a different, or have chosen or have by chance started a different path, that these experiences, these contacts stay. And I believe the practice, the experience you've done in these months might have given you more than the theoretical academic studies on European institutions. I guess, I see you nodding, and I guess it's not necessarily for good. But again, things look different when you touch them and you interact with them. And last thing before we start our conversation, in really the most informal manner you can still have after some months here, keep your approach. I know that sometimes you feel that you need to change in order to be accepted or to look like all the others in the environment. And I understand that, and to some extent this is true, this is normal. I remember very well when I started to work, not here and not in the McDonald's, but the first serious work, I went shopping and I bought 4 how do you say that in English? Tailleur, trousers and jackets, the most boring and ugly ones, black, gray, and dark brown, because I had to look serious. And probably that helped. No, I won't go more in that. But it's true that sometimes, especially if you're a young girl, and I see a lot of girls here in the room, which is good, sometimes you feel that you have to show that you're part of the system. And that is part of the game. But keep yourself, keep your angle, keep your mind, keep also the freedom of showing you're different, because that is the added value you bring to the system. If you're all the same, if we are all saying the same things, the same words, in the same way, if you all bring the same ideas, then the added value is 0. So keep thinking your own way, keep speaking your own way. At a certain moment, you'll be free to get dressed your own way, after having shown you can dress dark brown and gray. And keep this light, keep this enthusiasm that has brought you to come in this experience. Because I guess that if you have done this experience, it's not just for a job, but it's also because you believe in the fact that the European Union and the European institutions serve our citizens. And this is the sparkle that needs to stay and even sometimes to be re-injected in the system that has the risk of running by itself. We need to always remember ourselves why we're doing this and to bring the personal view on what counts. And at the end of the day, it's personal stories and it's personal lives. I thank you for your attention, and I'm waiting for your stories or your questions or your comments or whatever you want.
Thank you very much. We have about 10-15 minutes for questions. If we do by 3 questions, is it fine? We will do per 3 questions. I just ask you to make it in 1 or 2 sentences so that as many trainees as possible can ask their questions. So if you have any, please raise your hand. Or if you don't have questions. Ah, you 2. Okay, you 3. So you first, yeah, with the glasses.
Good morning. My name is Denise Ho. I'm currently a trainee in DG Trade, and thank you very much for this very insightful presentation of your life. My question was actually regarding your shift from the National Foreign Service to the European Foreign Service. What are the biggest differences you see in the way you engage with your work today? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Marina Carzol. I'm a trainee here in DG Trade. Very often in the EU institutions, we talk about the gender gap and how not enough women are in top positions. Well, you are one of those women that got into a top position. And I would like to ask you, did you feel that you had to overcome certain challenges just because you were a woman?
And the third question, I think it was in the middle. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Antonia. I'm a trainee at the council. I just realized that my question's not necessarily career related, but I might ask it anyway. I thought it was really interesting that you talked about your investment in the anti-racism campaigns in your youth. So I'm curious about your opinion on the recent allegations that there is a lot of racism at the European institutions. Thank you.
Easy ones. Being a woman, I tend to think this has not been a problem. Being a young woman, yes. I had the feeling many times that this, sorry if I mentioned the system, but you understand what I mean, the environment can digest young men, can digest women, but young women more difficult because it's two strange elements in one. Sorry, I'm very blunt. And to my surprise, because I came here, and this is true also for national systems. I don't think there's a difference here. On the contrary, the European environment is much more open than some of the national ones. I don't know all of them, but so this is true in general, I think, or at least this has been my experience in general. This sense of having to explain that at 40, 42, 44, you're not so young anymore, and in some societies, actually, you're old. You're starting to get old, and especially, if you've started being in Parliament 10 years ago. I mean, this sense of the young girl. Yeah, here comes the girl. Now it's not there anymore. And sometimes you wonder if it's the dark clothes you've been wearing in the beginning, or if it's because sometimes you're tough. Sometimes you feel you have to be a little bit tougher than if you were a man, to be taken a bit more, not seriously because they listen, but to understand that there are lines but again, I have not seen being a woman in particular ever as being a problem. But this issue of being a relatively young woman, sometimes yes. And then there's a question that always comes, never from colleagues, almost never from colleagues, always from journalists, and this is something I hate. How do you do with your children? And they never ask this to Katainen that has children, or Moedas that has children, have my age. Because being a mother and being a father has responsibilities, implies responsibilities, both genders. This is still a change we have to make in society, that children have two parents, and both parents have responsibilities towards the children. So we need to work on parental leaves, not only for women, also for men. And this would help women. So this was a particular angle. But again, no, being a woman has not been a problem as such. On the contrary, now even if I found myself many times as being the only woman in the room, many times. But I have to tell you, sometimes it can be even an advantage. In some cultures, it is more difficult to be particularly aggressive on women. And you can take this the other way around. Again, you find your ways. You find your ways. I don't want to use cliches, but it is true that normally, especially in foreign policy, especially in conflict mediation, it comes easier, I think, to us, suggest common ground, compromises, show the smile. And this is another thing, that sometimes you can be accused of being weak while you're simply soft. which is different than weak. You can be soft, but very strong and to the point. You don't necessarily have to shout or to be unpleasant, but you can stick to the things you have to do well. If you're in DigiTrade, you know another commissioner that is quite powerful and strong, even if keeps being a woman very, very clear. So again, in my experience, it has not been a problem. Sometimes has been a plus. But I've faced this issue of the age more than the issue of the gender, and I guess this was because also of my gender. The jump between the national and the European Foreign Service. Well, in terms of administration, in terms of role, in terms of responsibility, this was one of the elements I had to underline the most when I came here. That I was coming from the experience of being and having the responsibility of managing one of the foreign ministries, one of the biggest foreign ministries in the European Union, in terms of employees, in terms of embassies, in terms of budgets, in terms of administration, in terms of consular work. One of the things of the work that has changed a lot is the consular aspect in the European Union foreign policy is not there. Sometimes it is there because in any case we tend to protect European citizens and help national foreign services whenever they have consular cases, but you don't have the primary responsibility. Here, if you allow me another personal angle, to me, when I was a minister, the consular cases, especially cases of persons that were kidnapped or accidents or people that were dying far away from home, have always been personally the most difficult thing to manage. Meeting the parents, the mothers, the fathers, the families of people that had been kidnapped or had been rescued was emotionally one of the most difficult things to manage. And also from a working side, from the working point of view, I've always considered this as one of the heaviest experiences in the National Foreign Service. That is not there in the European one. But I can tell you, I still keep links with the families and sometimes the people that whose consular cases, most dramatic consular cases I had followed. Then it depends very much on the national services you have and the countries, because obviously Italy is a country with 60 million people and offers more consular cases than other countries that might have less population. But and Italians travel everywhere in the world, so sometimes there's a more complicated angle. And then obviously the most evident element of change is the mix of competencies. Because here I don't only do foreign policy. Here I do the traditional work of foreign policy and diplomacy, what would do a foreign minister in a national system. But I also do what the defense minister would do. And we've developed our defense work so much in this last couple of years. Because it was needed. I tend to think that it might also be because my background was in the Defense Committee in the National Parliament, in the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, so I had a defense background that I brought with me. And I have the Vice President of the Commission role that cannot fit with any national role you can imagine, because coordinating the work of the commissioners that have to do with external action is something that in national systems, in national governments, you don't have. And it's extremely powerful. I have to say one of the innovations we introduced with President Juncker when I started was this of having every month this meeting of the commissioners dealing with external action. Many refer to the RELEX commissioners group. I never refer to it this way because actually if you look at the presences we have in the meetings, in the monthly meetings, it's never only the external action commissioners. It always have different angles. Energy, climate, economy, industry, science, culture and education, you name it. it's never only the 4 or 5 of us. It always goes beyond, because we have developed, and or migration, you mentioned that. So I think that this angle of finding, developing, and coordinating the external angles of the different policies that are not traditionally intended as external is very much different from the national experience. And then the last element that is very different is the politics. If you're a minister in a national government, you have a different relation with the parliament, with the national parliament. You have a party life that is much more, I would say, you can use positive or negative terms. I don't enter there, but it's much more intrusive in your daily work and in your daily life than it is here, where the work is more institutional, even if there is always a political perspective you bring with you, because you are what you are and you think what you think, and this shapes the approach you take. Is there racism in European Union institutions? I have not seen it, but this doesn't mean that it's not there. Could be. What I am a bit surprised of is that we have little diversity in the services. We have very little diversity in the services. On one side, we have little diversity in the national services as well. It's very hard, and I didn't mention the most obvious difference between it being a national minister and being the representative, the coordination of the 28, which is not so problematic as someone could imagine. As you come from the council, you might be interested in that. I find that part of the work easy to coordinate the member states' position. But I see the national foreign services, I see the national defense staff. We have very little diversity also in member states, apart from a couple of cases, and not even so much. So is it because of that still change has to come at a national level before it comes to the European level? Is it for barriers that are there? Could be. Is it because we're not paying enough attention to positive discrimination? Could be. I think that in particular in the foreign policy area, we would only benefit from more diversity in our staff for cultural reasons, for relations with our partners in the world, and for our own image. I think that will only be positive.
Thank you very much. I look at the time and I think we can take one last question. Okay, there's actually, okay, 2 questions. You were the first one to raise your hand, and then just.
Oh, it doesn't, okay, I have to put it on. Okay, thank you for a very nice introduction. You have mentioned European identity, and also later you touched upon industrial. I was wondering, for those trainees who are looking for jobs in industry, maybe it's interesting to know what the European industry feels about European identity. Is there any European identity in the industry sector today, do you think?
Hello. Thank you very much for your presentation, everything you said and shared with us. I would love to see your CV, and I would love to see how many stars you put on your skills and the congregation of skills. And I'm sure we all put 5, but you can put 6 in some of the cases. And for example, stress management. But I see your performance in Serbia in the parliament or something like that. I just wanted to ask, in which amount did those skills get very positive feedback on your NGO work? So how many skills did you develop during your NGO work, and how many did you develop during your time here in the public sector? Thank you.
In the industry, well, I've never worked in the industry sector, but I've interacted a lot with the industry sector in these years. More in the years in the institutions, obviously, than in the years with NGOs. Or in my years in Parliament, where I was dealing only with foreign and defense policy. Even if with defense policy you have to deal with industry for a certain extent. What I see is that there's a potentially contradicting drive, an arrow that goes in two ways, in two directions in the industry. One is the competition. Industry is still, at the European level, what I see, there's still a lot of national background in competition with others, especially in some sectors. But on the other side, what I see abroad is that European industry come together, and especially come together with the European Union delegation in many countries in the world, to ask for support. Not one against the other, so no support to individual businesses, and we wouldn't do it anyway, but ask for support to the European way of making industry and business. The business environment, the anti-corruption, the certainty of the legal system, the transparency, the judiciary, all of that. So I see a common basis of European identity in the industry when it comes to the way in which business is perceived and industrial work is perceived, the rules of the game, but still a lot of national competition in some sectors. I think, and I see that in some sectors that are more linked to public procurement or national industries, I mentioned defense, for instance, this is still stronger than in other sectors where multinational approach can support a more European approach. Having said that, as I touched on the defense industry, I think that what we did on PESCO can change that dramatically, because incentivizing common projects among member states on the industrial side of defense can help the industry of defense overcome the national approach and develop European industry, which is what we need to do in economy of scale. But again, I was meeting CEOs of the space industry on Monday and Tuesday, and again there you see they are one, but they're not really one. So there's this common space, this common perception that, as often is the case, is perceived more when they meet the other. Then you feel you're European. I think it happens also with human beings. My skills, I have no idea. And I think, yeah, well, my CV, I guess, has not been updated recently, but I will, but I will in a year from now also. And I guess last time I updated my CV was very different, yeah. I don't, well, to a certain extent, there is a professional approach to this. There are things you learn with training. That was not my case. I have not gone through particular trainings. I've gone through education, but no particular training ever. There's a lot you learn by experience. In my experience, I've learned to do in the NGOs. I've learned to manage conflict in politics, and I've managed probably to communicate in the institutions. But I'm thinking loud. I've never thought of that. And then it comes with confidence. I think it comes with the confidence you see and the expectations you see people put in your role, not in you as a person, in what is expected from you. In this moment, it's clear. The expectation is that the European Union speaks loud and clear and is recognizable and is visible and is, you show the face, you show the flag. And so it's part of your job description, and you adapt to your job description and you develop your skills to meet your job description. So that sometimes you do things you're not particularly eager to do, but you have to do, and like a lot of media. And you know that this is important in this moment. Maybe 2 years ago it was less important, and maybe in 2 years' time it's less important. It depends on the political time you're living and in the capacity you have of, you and your team have to understand what is needed in this moment. In some moments, as it was last year, you need to put out the flag and be present everywhere and make clear that the European Union is there, is strong, is a point of reference, is reliable, is a partner. In some other periods, this goes a bit more without saying, or you need more to develop a more silent diplomacy or a more quiet approach, and then you need less to have communication skills. But I think, in general terms, that two things. One is that a lot depends on the team you have around you. I've never believed, and I will never believe in single individuals being super heroes or super skilled. It all depends on the people you have around you. You have good people working with you and never for you, always with you. I think this is essential, that it's a team, that you listen and that you follow advice. And that you value the work of every single people that is working with you. And the second thing is to develop good personal relations. Maybe this is the Mediterranean angle, but I think that establishing good personal relations, adding a touch of private understanding, being it with ministers, being it with the people of your team, brings a different way of also doing your work, a bit more present, and a certain element of solidarity that needs to be there, either if you work together, but even if you're not on the same side, you can always look at the ways in which you can establish the eye contact and a personal touch with the person in front of you, even if it's someone that is not necessarily your friend in political terms. But you can find a personal opening. Again, here, being a woman, you have to be careful in the respect of roles and limits and distances. But there is, and I believe there has to be always a human dimension, a human touch in the relations you have also when you're working on security, defense, foreign policy, even on the most difficult files. There's a moment when the human being comes out. And I think that helps also the work. Thank you, and all the best for these days, and especially for the continuation of the journey, being it here in the industry, in the academia, in the NGOs, in other parts of the world. Good luck. Thank you.